Listen, I understand how this must sound to you. Really, I do. A woman inherits property and suddenly starts talking about Bigfoot living in the woods. You're probably assuming I'm trying to attract tourists or planning to write some sensational book to cash in on cryptid fever or set up some kind of roadside attraction where people pay admission to hear fabricated stories. But that's not what this is about at all, not even remotely. I've deliberately kept this information completely private for the past 14 years, specifically because I didn't want curiosity seekers and amateur investigators and television crews trampling through here, disrupting what exists on this land, destroying through exposure and intrusion what has been carefully protected for decades. The only reason I'm finally sharing any of this now is that I'm approaching 50 years old, and the reality of mortality has started weighing on my mind in ways it didn't before, ways I couldn't have anticipated when I was younger and felt invincible. I've come to believe that someone else needs to know about this situation, needs to understand what's really happening here in these mountains before I'm gone, and the knowledge dies with me before this extraordinary thing is lost, because I failed to pass on what I've learned and experienced. Whether you choose to believe what I'm telling you is entirely your decision to make, and I respect that completely. I'm not invested in convincing skeptics or changing anyone's worldview or winning arguments with people who've already decided that creatures like this cannot possibly exist. I'm simply documenting the truth of my experience exactly as it happened and continues to happen, creating a record that might help someone in the future, someone who might find themselves in a similar situation, someone who might inherit this responsibility when I'm no longer capable of fulfilling it. This is testimony, not entertainment. This is truth, not fiction crafted for effect. When my aunt died in early autumn of 2010, I found myself unexpectedly inheriting her entire estate, which consisted of 420 acres of densely forested mountain land in the Appalachian region of Western Virginia, not far from the West Virginia border, where the mountains rise steep and ancient from the valleys below. The call came from her lawyer, a man I'd never met, on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was sitting in my cubicle staring at spreadsheets that felt meaningless. "Your Aunt Catherine has passed away," he said, "and you're the sole beneficiary of her estate." I'd barely known my aunt, had seen her maybe 5 times in my entire life, at family gatherings she reluctantly attended, always seeming uncomfortable in those settings, always departing early with vague excuses. She was my father's younger sister, and they'd never been close after she'd moved to the mountains in the mid-1970s following her divorce. The family had mostly written her off as eccentric, the odd one who'd chosen isolation over normal life, who'd rejected conventional success and stability for some incomprehensible reason no one understood. My aunt had lived alone on that property for nearly 35 years, rarely venturing into the small town 15 miles away, except when absolutely necessary to purchase supplies she couldn't produce herself. The local residents considered her eccentric at best and possibly mentally unstable at worst, one of those mountain hermits who'd rejected society. But the truth, which I would only come to understand much later, was that she simply valued her privacy above everything else. She'd found something in those mountains, something that made conventional human society feel shallow and meaningless by comparison. She left everything to me in a meticulously prepared will that ran 15 pages and detailed every aspect of the property transfer, along with the modest cabin she'd constructed with her own hands. It included a handwritten letter that contained only one sentence of instruction that I initially dismissed as meaningless philosophical rambling. The sentence read, "Give the mountain time to accept you and honor what you find there." At the time I received this cryptic message, sitting in the lawyer's office, I had absolutely no framework for understanding what she meant. I assumed she was speaking metaphorically about adapting to rural life. I certainly didn't imagine she was giving me literal instruction. about something extraordinary living on that property. I was 34 years old then, trapped in a soul-crushing administrative position at a corporate office in Richmond, spending 50 hours a week in a beige cubicle under harsh fluorescent lights that gave me headaches, performing tasks that felt utterly meaningless. I processed paperwork and attended meetings and wrote reports that no one read. The work was mind-numbing in its tedium, soul-destroying in its pointlessness. I'd wake up every morning with a sense of dread. The prospect of doing this for another 30 years until retirement felt like a prison sentence. The prospect of owning all that mountain land represented a possibility of escape that felt almost miraculous, an opportunity to completely restart my life. It felt like a door had opened in a wall I'd been staring at for years, a way out of a trap I'd walked into without fully realizing what I was giving up. An escape from fluorescent lights and spreadsheets and the constant low-level anxiety that had become my normal state of being. I submitted my resignation within 3 weeks of receiving the inheritance paperwork. My supervisor seemed baffled, offered me a raise and a promotion. I declined politely and worked my remaining days, clearing out my desk. My co-workers treated me like I was making a terrible mistake, abandoning security and benefits for some romantic fantasy. They warned me about isolation and boredom and the harsh realities of living. Without modern conveniences, I smiled and nodded and didn't try to explain that those conveniences felt like chains, that isolation sounded like paradise. I methodically packed up everything that mattered from my small, one-bedroom apartment, which turned out to be surprisingly little. I sold or donated most of it, keeping only essentials, books, camping equipment, and tools. I said goodbye to the few friends I'd managed to maintain, relationships that felt surface level. And then I loaded everything I was keeping into my aging Toyota pickup truck and drove west into the mountains to begin whatever this new chapter of existence would become, driving away from Richmond with a feeling of liberation so intense it was almost frightening in its power. The adjustment was considerably more challenging than I'd naively anticipated. There was no internet connectivity whatsoever. Cell phone service was unreliable at best, and my nearest neighbor lived roughly 12 miles away down a rutted dirt road. But I found myself appreciating the profound quiet in ways I hadn't expected. The cabin my aunt had built was small, but remarkably well constructed. It contained one bedroom with a window facing east to catch morning light, a kitchen area equipped with a wood-burning stove and a small sink connected to a hand pump that drew water from a spring. The living space was centered around a stone fireplace she'd built using rocks gathered from the property, the craftsmanship evident in how perfectly the stones locked together. A covered porch offered sweeping views of forested ridges extending in every direction. She'd constructed everything using lumber harvested from her own land, cutting and milling the timber herself with equipment that still sat in a small shed. The interior walls were lined with shelves containing hundreds of books and numerous journals filled with her handwritten observations about weather patterns, animal behavior, and plant phenology. I spent hours reading these journals, learning from her detailed records. There was no television, no computer, no connection to the constant stream of digital information. Just the forest, the mountains, the creek, and silence so complete it initially felt oppressive until I learned to hear the subtle sounds that filled it. It was full of wind moving through trees, bird calls, insect songs, and the distant rushing of water over rocks. During my first several months, I dedicated most of my energy to basic maintenance and exploring the land. I would spend entire days walking through the forest, trying to understand what had captivated my aunt so completely. The forest was dominated by mature oak, hickory, and tulip poplar trees. White-tailed deer were abundant. Wild turkeys moved through the property in large flocks. Black bears were present, though generally avoided direct encounters. The property contained remarkable natural features. A spring-fed creek, ancient trees, meadows of wildflowers, and rocky outcrops with spectacular panoramic views. The night sky, unobscured by light pollution, revealed the Milky Way in stunning detail. I began noticing unusual occurrences around the beginning of my 4th month. I would discover carefully constructed cairns of stacked stones near the creek bank, sometimes 4 or 5 rocks balanced impossibly on top of one another. Then I started encountering arrangements of broken branches that appeared overnight, branches deliberately bent and woven together to form distinct X-shaped patterns or arch structures, sometimes 8 or 9 feet up in trees. These were manipulated deliberately, with significant strength, by something capable of reaching high and weaving living branches together. I also discovered tracks that didn't correspond to any wildlife species I could identify. These were enormous impressions in soft mud, measuring at least 17 inches in length and showing 5 distinct toe marks. They were far too large to be black bear tracks and completely wrong in shape. When I found a sequence of these tracks, the stride length suggested something walking upright, with a gait that covered significantly more ground than my own steps. One morning in mid-September, I woke up to find a section of deer carcass placed directly in front of the cabin door. It was the hindquarter, relatively fresh. The flesh had been torn away from the bone rather than cut with any kind of blade. My immediate thought was that a bear must have left this, but that explanation dissolved quickly. Bears don't leave food behind uneaten, and this hadn't been dropped or dragged. It was deliberately placed, positioned with clear intentionality. This was a gift, an offering which implied conscious thought and purpose. I experienced genuine fear in that moment. I retrieved the rifle my aunt had kept in the cabin and sat on the porch for over an hour scanning the tree line. Nothing stirred. I considered calling someone, but what exactly would I report? Sheriff's department, something left meat on my porch? They would think I was having some kind of psychological episode. I wrapped the deer meat in plastic bags and stored it in the freezer. That night I barely slept, but nothing unusual occurred. Approximately 10 days later, the same thing happened again. This time, the offering was a rabbit, already skinned and gutted, positioned in exactly the same location. My fear had diminished, replaced by intense curiosity. Whatever entity was leaving these offerings clearly wasn't attempting to frighten me. If harm were the intention, there were countless opportunities. Instead of threatening behavior, I was receiving food. I made a decision that felt simultaneously intuitive and slightly absurd. I would reciprocate. I selected several apples, walked to the edge of the clearing, and carefully arranged them on a flat boulder. Then I returned to the cabin and positioned myself at the window to observe. Nothing happened for hours. Eventually, I gave up and went to bed. When I emerged the following morning, the apples had vanished. In their place sat a neat arrangement of wild pawpaw fruits. My heart began racing. This was unmistakable communication, proof of intelligence and intention, the social contract of exchange. Something in these mountains was consciously reaching out to me. I maintained this pattern of exchange over the following weeks and months. Every few days I would leave something at that boulder, fruit, nuts, bread, and every single time whatever I left would be taken and something would be left in its place. More wild fruits, unusual pine cones, a bird's nest, a collection of smooth river stones. These exchanges became a ritual that structured my days, making me feel less isolated. I was no longer alone on this mountain. The night I actually witnessed the creature itself was in late October. I was sitting on the porch after dinner, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket against the chill autumn air. The forest was quiet, just the usual sounds of owls and crickets. Then I heard something moving through the trees, something that made no attempt at stealth. Branches snapped audibly under significant weight. Heavy footfalls created vibrations I could feel through the porch boards, rhythmic impacts that suggested something large and bipedal. My heart started racing. I stood slowly, instinctively reaching for the rifle, but something stopped me. Some intuitive sense told me that displaying a weapon would be the wrong response. My hand released the rifle, and I stood there, empty-handed, waiting. The footsteps halted at the edge of the clearing, perhaps 60 feet away. I could see a shape in the darkness, tall and broad, a silhouette against the slightly less dark background. The shape was massive, towering at least 8 or 9 feet tall. The shoulders were wider than any human's, suggesting immense strength. This was a bipedal creature, something that belonged in mythology. We remained in that frozen tableau for what felt like an eternity, me motionless on the porch, the shape motionless at the forest edge. Then the shape shifted its weight and made a sound that changed everything. The vocalization wasn't aggressive or threatening. It was a low, complex and modulated sound, almost like words in a language I didn't know. The sound conveyed a combination of curiosity and caution. My fear began draining away, replaced by intense curiosity and a strange sense of privilege. This was the source of the gifts, the creator of the stone stacks and branch arrangements. This was the being that had been sharing this mountain with my aunt for decades, that was now extending that same tentative acceptance to me. This was Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever name people used. Except it wasn't mythology. It was standing right there in front of me, absolutely real. I didn't know what to do, so I simply raised one hand slowly in a gesture of peace. The shape remained still for several more seconds. Then I saw what might have been its arm lifting in a similar gesture. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, and within moments the sound of its passage had faded, leaving me alone on the porch, trembling with adrenaline and wonder. I barely slept that night, replaying those moments, questioning if I'd imagined it. But the evidence was too substantial. My aunt had known, I realized with sudden clarity. That cryptic note, "Honor what you find there," she'd been trying to communicate this exact situation. She had lived here with this creature for over 30 years, and now it was attempting to extend that acceptance to me. The pattern of our interaction evolved gradually over the months and years that followed. I continued leaving gifts, and the creature, whom I began thinking of as female, continued reciprocating. The gifts she left evolved to include things that seemed chosen specifically for me: interesting rocks with fossil impressions, feathers from rare birds, a perfectly symmetrical deer antler. I began seeing her more frequently, though always at a distance. She would appear at the edge of the clearing in early morning or evening twilight. She never approached closer than 50 feet. She was enormous, probably 8.5 feet tall, covered in dark, reddish-brown fur. Her face, when I occasionally glimpsed it in better light, was simultaneously human and not human, with a heavy brow ridge and broad, flat nose, but eyes that conveyed unmistakable intelligence and emotion. One incident in particular solidified our relationship. It was my second spring on the property, and I was several miles from the cabin clearing a trail, not paying adequate attention to my surroundings. A black bear, a mature male of over 300 pounds, emerged from the undergrowth about 20 feet away. It was spring, mating season, and male bears are often more aggressive. This one stood on its hind legs, a clear display of dominance, and made a huffing sound that communicated aggression. I froze, but the bear wasn't backing down. It dropped to all fours and took several deliberate steps toward me. Its ears were back, its mouth slightly open, showing teeth. I realized with cold terror that this might escalate into an attack. I had no weapon with me. Before I could decide on any response, something massive crashed through the forest from my right with shocking speed and power. The Bigfoot appeared, moving faster than I would have thought possible, and positioned herself between me and the bear. She put her body directly in the path of the threat. She made a vocalization that was like nothing I'd ever heard, a roar so powerful and primal that I felt it resonating in my chest. The bear's reaction was immediate and absolute. It backed down instantly, retreating into the undergrowth in obvious submission. The Bigfoot remained in her protective stance for another moment, then turned to look at me. Our eyes met directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark brown, with a depth and intelligence that was startling. She held my gaze for several seconds, and I understood she was checking if I was okay. I nodded, which seemed to satisfy her, and she turned and walked back into the forest, leaving me shaking with adrenaline and gratitude. That incident changed everything, transforming our relationship from cautious coexistence to genuine care and protection. She had intervened to save my life. As years passed, our relationship deepened. I learned to interpret the different sounds she made. A particular ascending hoot meant she was nearby. A lower grunt seemed to indicate contentment. A sharp, bark-like sound served as a warning. I developed my own repertoire of sounds and gestures that she appeared to understand. Winter was particularly significant. My second winter brought a severe storm that dumped over 3 feet of snow. On the third night, I heard heavy footsteps on the porch. I looked out to see the Bigfoot standing there, covered in snow, checking on the cabin. When she saw me at the window, she made that acknowledging grunt, then disappeared back into the blizzard. After the storm passed, I discovered she'd cleared snow from around the woodshed door and broken ice on the spring that fed my water supply. People occasionally ask me, on my infrequent trips to town, how I manage living alone, whether I get lonely. I tell them I enjoy the solitude, which is true, but incomplete. I don't mention that I'm not actually alone, that loneliness isn't possible when you're in a relationship with another conscious being who demonstrates consistent care. I haven't told a single person about this. The temptation to gather evidence and prove to the world that these creatures are real has occasionally been strong. But I understand what would happen. Researchers would descend on this place. The Bigfoot would be driven away, her home destroyed. Or worse, someone might try to capture her. I won't be responsible for that. I won't betray the trust she's placed in me. My aunt understood this. She lived here for 35 years, maintaining this same secrecy. She passed that responsibility to me, and I've dedicated my life to honoring that trust. I saw the Bigfoot yesterday evening. She appeared at the clearing edge right around sunset. We have a routine. I sit on the porch steps, she stands at the tree line, and we spend time together in comfortable silence. Last night she stayed for nearly an hour. The moon rose nearly full, and I could see her clearly. At one point, she made that soft grunt of contentment, and I made a similar sound back to her. Eventually, she turned and walked unhurriedly up the slope. I watched until she disappeared. Then I went inside, thinking about how extraordinary and unlikely and precious this whole situation is. This is my life now, and I wouldn't change it for anything. My days are spent maintaining the property, tending my garden, reading and walking the trails. My evenings are often spent on the porch, sometimes alone, sometimes in the company of a creature that shouldn't exist, but does. It's a good life, a meaningful life. I think my aunt knew this would happen. I think she recognized something in me that suggested I could handle this responsibility. She was passing on more than real estate. She was passing on a legacy of protection and care, a sacred trust. I hope I can do the same when my time comes. I hope I can identify someone worthy of inheriting this place, someone who will continue the work my aunt started and I've maintained. That's what matters most. Not proving to skeptics that these creatures are real. What matters is protection, preservation, ensuring that this particular Bigfoot can continue existing without human interference. So if you're hearing or reading this and thinking I'm delusional, that's acceptable to me. I've chosen this life deliberately. The Bigfoot is real, living on this property. She's peaceful and intelligent and worthy of protection. That's the truth, regardless of whether anyone believes it, and I'm going to spend whatever years I have remaining ensuring she stays safe, stays hidden, stays free. That's my promise to my aunt, to this land, and to the Bigfoot herself. It's a promise I intend to keep until the day I die.